Okay, so let's say that you are a dryad, and you dig plants that bear fruit. You live in a grove where there's apples and pears and grapes and peaches and all that other kind of stuff, and you tend to them because since you live there, it's your garden, right? So then some other deific figures are like, hey, that nymph over there's pretty hot. I think I'm gonna try to bed her. Two of them show up a few times, and they try to impress you and woo you and things, but they do such a bad job that not only do you not like them, but you build a literal wall around the grove that you live in with a gate on it, and you basically say, no people who have romantic interests in me at all allowed in my grove, period. End of discussion. If this is you, then your name is Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and nut trees, and I've got a lot more of the story to tell about you. So Pomona is a Roman goddess who actually, really uncommonly and strangely doesn't have a Greek counterpart. Like, you know how most Roman gods and goddesses have the Greek counterpart from which they came? Pomona doesn't technically have one. Some people liken her to Demeter, but that could be argued because they're technically, it would be that Pomona is an aspect of Demeter, but it's different. Anyway, she shares a festival with another deity that we'll talk about in a little bit on August 13th of the year. She is an associated deity with not the harvest, but rather just the burgeoning and bountifulness of plants. So, while you'll have a lot of other gods that are god of the harvest, Horo, for instance, from Spice and Wolf, would be a goddess of the harvest. Pomona, on the other hand, is just a goddess of stuff growing really well and being delicious. So those two guys that I mentioned earlier, names are Silvanus and Picus. So Silvanus is low enough on the hierarchy that he's technically considered a familiar spirit more than he is an actual god. Or even a type of familiar spirit. They say that every plot of farmland has 3 Silvanuses on it. Silvani, I guess. Yeah, there's the one that guards the house, there's the one that guides the shepherds around, and there's the one that marks the edges of territory with stones. He's basically associated with the edges of farmland and grazing land and that kind of stuff. He always shows up in literature as being a kind of chipper and cheerful but old man. And his worshippers were actually solely male because he didn't have any dominion over the work that females did on the farms and the fields and that kind of thing. His thing was solely the stuff that men did. The women had a different deity. So Picus is a little bit more of a complicated dude. Roman myth says that he was the first king of Latium, which is where Rome is, and was the son of the god Saturn. So whether he actually existed or not, I couldn't find in my research. But anyway, stories tell of his superior abilities with fortune telling via birds, aviary signs, reading how they fly in the air, or cutting them open and splitting their guts on the ground or whatever like that, and then reading how those turn out. He was apparently super good at those. His main story has to do with the witch Circe, who basically came onto him one day and is like, hey, you're pretty cute. You wanna, and he's like, nah, I don't really, probably be okay, thanks, don't wanna, maybe step into that. And Circe goes, well, fuck you then, and turns him into a woodpecker, which is the bird that he used the most in his auguries. During this period of his story, he had a wife that he's super devoted to, so the bit where he is in Pomona's story must have happened way before any of the thing with Circe. His wife actually was named Canaans, and was also a nymph. I guess Picus has a type. So Silvanus shows up first, and is like, I'm gonna do this, and tries to woo Pomona a couple times. He shows up first and he's like, yeah, I'm a hunter. I've got a bag with the prey that I just got in it, and I got a spear. And Pomona's like, ew, no, go away. So then he shows up later and he's like, yeah, I'm a shepherd, and I've got a crook to show that I've just been out doing shepherd stuff. And she's like, ew, but still no, go away. But anyway, during one of those times, Picus shows up to try to woo her and sees Silvanus leaving, and is like, oh, he must be her favored suitor. I'll I'll just have to beat the shit out of him. And they get into a fist fight, and Sylvanas, who is a significantly, like, older and more veritable, like, deity figure, trounces the shit out of him. And Sylvanas is like, yeah, you gonna do something about that? But in the meantime, Pomona's watching this whole thing happen, and is like, yeah, I don't think, yeah, no more boys, no boys allowed, walls, gate, bugger off. Anyone who has any kind of romantic interest at all is not allowed inside my grove, cause I don't want to deal with that shit. So then in comes Vertumnus, who is the god of the change of seasons, and as such, has the power to change his appearance at will, like, you know, blink of an eye, that kind of thing. So he comes across Pomona, and he loves her, like, way more than the other two do. Like, he's instantly devoted to this lady. So he tries for, like, quite a long time to get her to grant him entry into the garden grove so that he could woo her. He tries, he comes as a farmer one day, he comes as, like, a grass mower one day, a plowman, a fruit picker, but none of the stuff that he does to be like, hey, I'm an agriculturally kind of guy, works on her at all, and she basically just, like, leaves him at the gate, and is like, no, you know the rules, bye, I'm gonna go chill with my apple trees and stuff. And he gets like, oh, well, this is lame. But then he has an idea. So he turns himself into an old woman with like a hood and old scraggly hair, very like Snow White style. And Pomona sees the old woman and is like, oh, you're obviously chill because of your supposed lack of a penis, so you can't be in love with me or anything. You can come and chill with me in my grove and all that. So they go in and they hang out together for a little while. And during this whole time, Vertumnus is like really laying on the compliments and flattering her and being like, dude, you're so good at gardening. What is all of this like really cool stuff that you've got going on? You've grafted trees together, so now there's 2 different kinds of fruit on the same tree? What kind of crazy is that? That's awesome! And she's like, oh, cool, thanks. He noticed that she'd trained a grapevine to run up an elm tree's trunk, and so no joke, this is how he convinces her that having a boy around would be a good idea. I'm gonna read this directly from the Odyssey, right? It says, the elm tree supported the vines which were covered with bunches of grapes. Look, said the old woman, if that elm tree stood unmated to the vine, it would have no value except for its timber, and the vine that grows there. If there was no elm tree for it to grow upon, it would straggle along the ground, flat and unflourishing. So you see what good comes of mating 2 beings, the vine and the elm tree. But you, my dear, refuse to be mated, refuse to be wedded, refuse to even know one who might be a sweetheart for you. Listen, consent to having an old woman like me make a match for you. And she falls for it. She's like, yeah, okay, who do you think's a good guy? And he's like, well, obviously it's Vertumnus. He's young and sprightly and sensitive and not a player like Picus or a geezer like Sylvanas. And then she's like, okay, that might be fine. And then he goes, surprise, it's me, and throws off the cloak and all that. And then they make out a whole bunch. And the story says that they remained together until the stars came out. So they probably just boned a whole bunch, which is great. But anyway, the story ends at that point with Pomona consenting to wed him. So the story is commonly interpreted in 2 ways. The first being that the first 2 guys who tried to like force themselves upon her represented like the idea of rape, and that Vertumnus' approach of like convincing her that he's actually a good dude represents the idea of mutual attraction trumping just forcing yourself on somebody, which I don't know if I buy that at all, because if it's anything, Vertumnus tried to do the same thing and ended up doing it just good enough that she was tricked by him, so I don't know if I dig that. The second way is that it represents the feminine psyche, and that, like, the direct and outright shows of, you know, force or muscles or showing off work less than the subtle and meaningful connections. I think this story was written by a guy who was told by the girl he was trying to woo, oh, you're such a nice guy, and then didn't get laid afterwards, so he went and wrote a story where being a nice guy does get you laid. I think that's what this story was. You can actually read this story in Ovid's Metamorphosis. It's free all over on the internet. I'll put a link to where you can read it in the description, so if you wanna take a look at it, it's pretty good that way. Personally, I think playing a cleric of Pomona in Dungeons & Dragons would be a super fun character. The holy symbol would be a pruning knife, which was Pomona's aspect way back when. And it would have, like, ivy twisted around it with, like, an apple stuck to the bottom or something like that. And you'd get, like, double spells from the nature domain so long as they pertained to plant life. I think it'd be super cool that way. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Deity Salad. It's a fun story. It's kind of like, oh, is this really how it's going? But you know, the Greeks and the Romans kind of did that a little bit. If you like this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. You can also follow my Facebook and Twitter in the description box down below. And if you feel like doing it, you can maybe take a look at my Patreon page and send me some support that direction. That'd be super cool. I would really appreciate it. Thank you guys very much, and I will see you next time.